I want you to take a minute and think about the worst mistake you've ever made, the worst sin you've ever committed. It may be something nobody else other than God knows about, but take a second and think about that. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. But before we get to that, I want to thank everyone who helped with the Crop Walk Sunday. We appreciate all you did for that. Hopefully next year we'll see all this COVID stuff in the rearview mirror and get back to normal. And don't forget that this Sunday, October 18th, is our congregation meeting to select officers for next year. We'll have that meeting immediately after the worship service. And on October 25th, the youth will be going to the corn maze at Liberty Farms. This is a huge maze, a lot of fun, and so make plans to have your kids and your grandkids here for that. The cost is $14, and we'll leave right after the worship service. And children under 12 will need to have an adult with them, so make sure you arrange for that, but we hope that you can join us for that. And October 25th is the deadline for the Sacks of Hope donations for Christmas presents for the children in orphanages in Romania and Tanzania that's run by Remember the Children. There are envelopes at the information center for those, or if you want to mail it to the church or just bring it by, just designate it to Sacks of Hope. And if you're bringing it by the office, just remember to call first so I can make sure that I'm here to get that. You know, even though we're starting a new series this coming week called Third Rail, Balancing Politics and Faith, we're still focusing on our missions points at Cherry Avenue. So be looking on our Facebook page for information on these groups. And we'll have a wall out in the foyer that Pat J. and Candace W. have spent a lot of time putting together that highlights all of our missions points. So make sure that you check that out on Sunday. Well, when my grandmother came to live with us, I'd come out to leave for school in the morning and she'd be at the table reading the paper. And it seemed like I always saw her reading the obituaries. And I'd ask why, and she'd say it with me now, to see if my name's in there. I think that's one of those jokes that kind of writes itself because everyone makes that same joke. But obituaries can be interesting to read. And sometimes it says more about the person writing the obit than it does about the person who died. This is an obituary from the New York Times in 1974. The deceased, Fred Snodgrass, had what seems to be a very successful life. He was a banker, a rancher, served as the mayor of Oxnard, California. He had a long, successful marriage, 2 children, and 5 grandchildren. And he even played 9 years in the major leagues with the New York Giants and the Boston Braves. But what the obituary focuses almost all of its attention on, from the headline on, is an error he made in the 10th inning of the final game of the 1912 World Series that cost the Giants the championship. In fact, it goes into great detail to show how that mistake lost the series. You know, it's really sad to see a man remembered for his worst mistake. In fact, in Snodgrass's case, there's a strong argument that his error didn't really lose the series. There were several mistakes that inning that contributed to the loss. But kind of like Bill Buckner 74 years later, that error gets blamed and it sticks with a person forever. And unfortunately, it seems like that's worse than ever today. Social media has created a climate of cancel culture, which basically seeks to destroy a person for even perceived mistakes that the cancel mob doesn't like. Someone could tweet something dumb when he's 14 years old, as teenagers are wont to do, and it could destroy him years later. But thankfully, as Christians, we don't have to be remembered for our greatest mistakes. In fact, when we come to Christ, all of our sins are wiped away as if they never happened. We might have to deal with some of the physical consequences of our choices, but in God's eyes, spiritually, we're as clean and pure as the wind-driven snow. Those mistakes we tend to beat ourselves up over, He's completely forgotten them. And so when my epitaph is written, instead of saying, local minister Stan Martin dies, lost temper and punched holes in walls when younger, or Stan Martin dies, held grudge against a thief for years, to God it will say, Stan Martin dies, forgiven follower of Jesus Christ and beloved child of God. Not because I'm such a great person, but because God is such a great and loving and compassionate and forgiving God. That sin that you thought of earlier, that mistake that you hate thinking about, all of that and every other sin you've committed is gone as far as God's concerned. That's the beauty of God's grace. That even though the world may judge a person on his greatest mistake, God sees us as his forgiven children. When reading about that obituary in the New York Times, what really comes across to me is that the writer seems like a bitter old Giants fan who just couldn't get over losing to the Red Sox. And as a lifelong Yankees fan and someone who had to endure watching them lose a 3-0 series lead to the Sox in 2004, I get it. But the series was in 1912 and Snodgrass died in 1974. Maybe after 62 years, it's time to let it go. Just saying.